The world had been bleached into two colors, white snow and black rock, like somebody had turned the mountains into an old war photo and forgotten to add the rest back in. Daylight poured down hard and merciless, bouncing off crusted drifts until every shadow looked like a lie. The pass below was a tight cut between ridges, a narrow throat that funneled wind and men the same way. And right now, it was a grinder. The seal element was pinned on a frozen ridgeline just above that throat, half crouched, half sprawled, boots skidding on ice-polished stone. Rounds snapped from higher shelves, skipping off rock with an ugly, brittle sound that didn't belong in a place this quiet. "Contact! Hi! Hi!" somebody shouted, and the shout got shredded by another burst. The point man had already paid for being first. He lay on his side where the ridge angled down, sliding a few inches every time his body twitched. The snow under him was slick as glass. His rifle had slipped free and hung by its sling, dragging and tapping like a metronome of bad luck. "Hold still, the corpsman said, voice low, and started crawling toward him. He made it 2 feet before the enemy punished the attempt. A tight, deliberate string of shots cracked overhead and walked down the ridge like someone drawing a line on a map. Stone spat chips into the corpsman's face. He flattened instinctively, cheek pressed to ice, the cold biting through fabric like teeth. "They've got our angles," the corpsman breathed. "They've got all of them." He wasn't wrong. This wasn't random fire. It wasn't even angry fire. It was surgical, bursts that bracketed movement, single rounds that slapped near hands and elbows, a heavy weapon thumping from the far slope with the slow confidence of something crew-served. And somewhere above it all, separate from the hammering, a crisp crack kept returning. One shot, one pause, one shot, like a patient metronome controlling the open ground. The platoon chief, senior enlisted, the kind of man who could make panic obey him, shouted over the noise. "Smoke and bound. We're moving left. We're moving now." A canister hissed and spat gray. For half a second it looked like salvation. Then the wind sheared it sideways, flattened it like a sheet, and dragged it straight across their own line of sight, turning the ridge into a shadow puppet show. In the glare, bodies became silhouettes. The smoke didn't hide them. It outlined them. "Smoke's useless," someone yelled. "Wind's taking it." "Then we improvise," the platoon chief snapped, but the words sounded thin against the geometry of the kill zone. "Radio check," the comm specialist said, already trying. "Lima 2. This is Lima 1. Say again, say again." "Dead A." He smacked the handset, checked the screen. It flashed an error that meant nothing and everything. He toggled to Saturday. The link wouldn't handshake. He tried again, jaw tight, fingers going numb. Nothing. "Comms are jammed," he said, like he was reporting weather. "Long range is dead." The words landed like a body. Somebody else shouted mag counts. 2 mags. 1.5. 3 left. Rifles were heating, breath steaming, gloves slipping on slick grips. The ridge offered no real cover, just jagged rock and ice berms that looked solid until a round hit them and they exploded into powder. Down the slope, the pass narrowed further, and the enemy had them in a funnel. You could feel it, like the mountains had closed their jaws and decided to chew. A SEAL near the center of the line pressed his helmet into the snow and spoke without humor, like he was reading his own obituary. "We won't make it." Nobody argued. Not out loud. Overhead, a thin hum drifted in, faint at first, almost mistaken for wind. Then it resolved into something mechanical. "Drone." A man tilted his head, squinting up into the white sky until his eyes watered. "There. 10 o'clock high. It's tagging us." The drone flicked into view, a dark insect against glare, paused for a breath, then darted away behind the ridge like it had only needed a glance. Like it was sending coordinates to something hungry. The extraction bird clock had already been discussed before the first shot. Now it was the only thing anyone could think about. "We've got minutes," the platoon chief barked into the short-range net. "If we're not out of this throat, the bird won't come. Weather's rolling in. If enemy reinforcements seal the pass." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. And then, amid the shouting and the metallic panic, there was someone who wasn't doing any of it. She lay a few yards off the main cluster, behind a low outcropping that barely counted as cover. Her face was pale from cold, but her eyes were steady. Her breathing was controlled, slow, as if she was on a range instead of in a slaughter corridor. She'd been the extra on the manifest, not one of their usual faces. Unattached, quiet, the kind of operator who didn't fight for attention and therefore didn't get it. The jokes at staging had stuck to her like frost, ghost, shadow, spare part. Now, while everyone else was trying to outshout the chaos, she listened. Between bursts, there was a faint electronic chirp, barely audible. It came in a pattern, and the pattern lined up with the drone's passes: chirp, drone glide, burst, chirp, drone glide, crack of the marksman. She watched the rhythm, watched the enemy shots tighten whenever the chirp happened. It wasn't just observation. It was coordination. A spotter-jammer team syncing a fire plan to a machine that could see through glare and distance. They weren't just shooting. They were conducting. And then the enemy adapted. 2 climbers appeared on the left side wall, moving with ropes and crampons, using a snow-swept seam in the rock. Suppressors kept the seals pinned while the climbers advanced like patient spiders. In minutes, they'd be above the rear element. They'd cut the line. They'd turn the funnel into a closed box. The platoon chief saw them. Left flank, watched the climbers. The corpsman tried to move again. The point man slid another inch and made a sound like pain had become a language. The drone's hum returned, closer. The world tightened to noise and ice and the fact that they were running out of time in every direction at once. And then, silence. Not the natural silence of mountains. The sudden, unnatural kind that hits your ears after something loud stops too quickly. A single shot punched through the quiet. It didn't sound like the others. Deeper, sharper, like thunder trapped in the cold. Everyone froze, because for a heartbeat the shot didn't make sense. Then, as if somebody had flicked a switch on the hillside, multiple enemy positions went quiet. 1, 2, 3. A line of them. It happened too fast for a clean count, but the effect was immediate. Fire slackened, then collapsed. And it wasn't just gunfire stopping. It was bodies disappearing behind a curtain of snow and rock that suddenly moved like a living thing. A slab broke loose somewhere above the enemy shelf. Snow sheared, rolled, accelerated. Rock followed. It swept across the high ledge where the heavy weapon had been thumping, slammed through clustered silhouettes, and vanished into the ravine below in a roaring, grinding white wall. Seconds. That was all it took. 4 to 2 enemies would be counted later, when the adrenaline had drained and someone had the stomach to look. Right now, it felt like the hillside itself had snapped shut. The SEALs stared up at the ridgeline where the storm had come from, stunned, unsure if they'd just been saved by an air asset, a freak avalanche, or something worse. Above them, unseen, a bolt cycled. A second round was chambered with calm precision, and whoever had fired it did not announce herself. Before daylight turned the snow into a mirror, the outpost had looked almost peaceful. It sat high and lonely on the mountain's shoulder, a relay site for border surveillance, a place built more for antennas and cables than for men. The air was thin and sharp. The snowfield beyond the perimeter fence stretched clean and untouched in the blue pre-dawn, like the world hadn't been ruined yet. Inside the main hut, breath hung in the air as the team crowded around a map taped to plywood. Red grease pencil lines cut across the terrain. The officer in charge, young enough to still sound like he believed in timetables, tapped the narrow pass on the map. We go in at first light. We escort the intel tech to the compromised sensor node. We retrieve the module. We exfil through the pass. Extraction at the pickup zone, one shut, tight window. He looked up. Questions. There were always questions. They just didn't always get asked. The platoon chief stood with arms crossed, eyes tired. We're moving into a choke. High ground everywhere. If they want to hit us, they'll hit us there. Terrain masks comms, the comms specialist added, rolling a shoulder. We've had intermittent interference last 2 nights. Like someone sweeping frequencies. The officer shrugged. Mountains do that. We're on a clock. We don't have the luxury of circling. A few of the guys smirked at the back of the room. where the attached Saturday luxury of circling. One whispered, "Guess we brought a ghost for decoration." Another said, "She's Overwatch, right? Support. Not like she's gonna decide the day." The attached didn't respond. She didn't look offended. She didn't look anything. She checked her kit with a quiet discipline that bordered on ritual. Cold weather wraps. Simple layering. Batteries tucked close to body heat. A compact weather meter clipped where she could reach it without looking. A dope card, handwritten corrections and quick references, taped inside her sleeve so she could read it with a glance. She didn't stack brand names. She didn't show off. She looked like someone who'd learned that gear is only as good as your ability to keep it working in bad conditions. The Intel tech arrived late, bundled in civilian cold weather gear that didn't fit right. His eyes were darting. He carried a small hard case like it weighed more than it should. "This module cannot fall into enemy hands," he said immediately, voice too sharp for the room. "If you have to break it, break it. If you have to bury it, bury it." The platoon chief studied him. "What is it?" "Routing keys," the tech said, then hesitated like he'd already said too much. "Access identifiers. If they get it, they can spoof the network. Blind it. Use it against you. Against everyone." The officer frowned. "You should have said that in the brief." "I'm saying it now," the tech snapped, then caught himself, swallowing. "Please, just don't let them take it." The attached watched him while he spoke. Not the words, his hands. They shook, not from cold, from fear that had names attached to it. Outside, the team stepped off into the blue half-light, snow crunching under boots. The world was calm enough to make you think violence was a rumor. Distant peaks stood like indifferent judges. As they moved, the attached drifted slightly behind the column, not lagging, just offset. She scanned the ridge lines the way some people read faces. She caught wind changes, small shifts that would matter later. She noticed tracks in the snow that were too disciplined to be animals, too straight to be wanderers. She saw cut branches marking lanes along the pass mouth, as if someone had been quietly shaping the terrain. Ambush prep. She considered speaking, considered how her words would land against schedule pressure and confidence. Ahead, the officer kept pushing pace. "We're late already," he said when she asked for a pause to glass the ridge. "We stop, we'll lose the window." She didn't argue. She did what she always did when arguing wouldn't help. She filed it away. Near the route, a small shepherd hut sat half buried in drift, smoke faint from a chimney. The platoon chief pointed at it. "We don't draw fire toward that. Could be non-combatants. We keep our angles clean." The attached nodded once, eyes measuring the hut's position relative to the pass. A moral constraint, added to a growing stack. Somewhere up high, she caught a glint, metal where there should have been only rock, and a thin line in the snow, almost invisible, like a camouflaged antenna wire. When she blinked, it vanished behind terrain. Later, in full daylight, she saw a speck in the sky, a drone, far enough to be mistaken for a bird if you wanted to lie to yourself. It vanished when she tried to track it. She did not announce it. Not yet. Not without proof. Not without a plan. At the sensor node, the Intel tech worked fast, hands moving like he was trying to outrun his own fear. He pulled the module, sealed it in the hard case. His breath came in short bursts. "They are not here for you," he said as they stepped away. The platoon chief glanced at him. "What?" The tech swallowed. His eyes flicked to the ridge. "They are here for this." The attached felt the air change as they headed toward exfil. It wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of quiet that presses down. The kind that means the mountain is listening. She tightened her sling and shifted her position slightly, staying behind the column, eyes up. And somewhere above them, unseen, the trap waited with patience. The first shots cracked as soon as they entered the throat. Not warning shots, not probing fire. Controlled, deliberate rounds from above that forced the team down into the frozen creek bed where the walls rose steep and mean on either side. The creek was a ribbon of ice, slick and shallow, bordered by berms of wind-packed snow that looked like cover until rounds shredded them. "Down! Down!" the platoon chief shouted, and everyone dropped hard. The enemy fire plan revealed itself in seconds. like a magician showing his trick with no shame. A marksman controlled the open ground. One crack, one head forced down. Two machine gun positions raked the only climbable slope. RPG teams stayed back in shadows, waiting to punish any vehicle, any group, any obvious movement toward a pickup zone. The SEALs tried to respond with discipline. One element suppressed while the other shifted. Textbook movement. Clean. Fast. It didn't matter. The enemy had overlapping lanes and knew their timing. Every time the SEALs attempted a bound, Bose bracketed the move like the enemy had rehearsed it. Comms, the comms specialist barked, already trying again. Lima 2, Lima 2. Short range worked, tight net, line of sight. But long range push-to-talk was dead. Sat wouldn't handshake. Every attempt to reach extraction dissolved into nothing. Communications jammed, he said again, and this time the sentence tasted like blood. The corpsman crawled to the point man in the ice. He worked with hands that didn't shake, clamping, wrapping, sealing. The point man's face was gray under his goggles. I can keep him alive, the corpsman said. But moving him meant speed lost. Speed lost meant the window closed. The window closed meant death. A rifle near the re-element started coughing instead of firing. Ice intrusion. The operator smacked the mag. Cleared the chamber. Tried again. It fired once, then jammed. Another SEAL's optic fogged and refused to clear. He wiped it with a glove, made it worse, then ripped it off and went iron sights, at a distance where iron sights felt like prayer. Wind shifted, lifting snow dust into the air. Visibility strobed. 1 second clear, the next washed out glare. Target ID became a gamble. A bad shot could hit the wrong silhouette, could send rounds toward the shepherd hut. Above them, the drone returned, closer. It hovered just long enough to be seen, just long enough to tell them they were being watched, then darted away. The platoon chief called for fallback to a rock fold ahead, a small defile that might offer cover. They moved for it and got punished immediately. Impact smacked stone near the fold. Not direct hits, bracketing. Indirect threat. Someone up high was walking rounds onto the very place they'd chosen. Pre-registered, the platoon chief snarled. They knew we'd go there. The intel tech, crouched low, panicked. He stumbled, the hard case slipping from his hands and thudding into the ice. Hey, a SEAL snapped, snatching it up. The case was suddenly heavier, not physically, but in what it represented. A liability and a prize. The officer's face tightened as he watched the enemy hold fire on obvious kill shots, instead sealing routes. They are trying to box us, he said, realization cutting through adrenaline. They want us alive. For what? Someone shouted. The answer hovered in the air with the drone's hum. Propaganda. Intel. A captured team on video. A victory message. The extraction clock tightened. The platoon chief could feel it the way you feel a storm in your bones. If we don't move now, the bird won't come, he said into the net. And if it comes late, it dies in the throat. A moment of quiet slid in between bursts, and in that moment, the attached spoke. Her voice was calm, almost soft. I can get above them, she said. Overwatch. Break their rhythm. The platoon chief looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. The officer hesitated. Splitting forces felt like death when you were already bleeding time. You go up there alone, the officer said, and we lose you. We stay here, she replied, eyes still on the ridge, and you lose everyone. The drone hummed again, closer, and the enemy climbers appeared on the side wall, ropes biting snow, crampons scraping rock. The pass was becoming a graveyard by inches. The platoon chief's jaw clenched. He hated the math, but he knew it. Do it, he said. Go. And the quiet extra on the rope became the only move left. She didn't make a speech. She didn't ask for permission twice. She simply shifted her pack, slid close to the platoon chief, and started stripping weight. Take my extra mags, she told the nearest SEAL, pushing them into his chest rig. You'll need them more than I will. Someone tried to protest. She cut it off with a look. She kept what mattered. Minimal ammunition. 1 coil of cord. A single ice screw. A small tool roll. Her weather meter. Her rifle, wrapped against Glay. A sidearm, not because she wanted it, but because you don't climb into enemy territory without a last resort. The route she chose wasn't the obvious slope. The obvious slope was death. She moved toward a wind-scoured face where rock jutted through thin snow like knuckles. A narrow ledge ran along it, barely wide enough for boots. Above that, a frozen waterfall section, ice layered in ripples and bulges, a place where one mistake meant a long fall into hard ground. Nobody wanted that route. That's why it was useful. She timed her movement with the enemy firing cycles. When burst hammered the ridge below, she moved, because noise covered her. When the firing paused, she froze, because stillness is invisibility. Wind gust became her metronome. When the gust hit, it threw snow into the air, hiding her silhouette. When it died, the world turned glass-clear and dangerous. Her breathing stayed controlled, a slow rhythm that kept panic from taking her hands. The world narrowed, glove grip, boot edge, cord taut, ice screw biting. A round crack somewhere above and to her right. She paused, listening. Not fear, calculation. Was it aimed? Was it coincidence? In this terrain, coincidence could still kill you. Her optic lens cap cracked when she brushed a rock seam, a small snap that sounded loud in her head. She looked at the cap, then at the air filled with fine snow dust. Exposed glass would catch grit, fog, glare, but keeping the broken cap could cause it to fail later. Jam, stick. She removed it and stowed it. Better to manage glass than to trust a broken hinge. Above, she heard the drone before she saw it. Thin electric hum cutting through wind. She flattened under a rock lip, pressing into cold stone. The drone passed overhead, searching patterns, its shadow sliding across snow like a fingertip. It didn't see her. She waited until the hum faded, then moved again. As she climbed, she caught the source of the faint chirps she'd heard earlier. A camouflaged antenna line, carefully run along the rock. A small power unit tucked into a notch. A radio operator team crouched near it, speaking into headsets, eyes glued to the pass below. The jammer. It wasn't just blocking signals. It was coordinating fire, syncing bursts with drone passes, making the kill zone a machine. The moral constraint returned with a bite. One enemy position was set near the line of sight toward the shepherd hut. Firing recklessly could send rounds toward civilians. Collapsing terrain without thought could roll down into the hut's drifted roofline. She adjusted her mental map, marking zones where she would not shoot unless there was no other option. She reached a pocket of high ground, a natural nest formed by two slabs of rock with snow packed between them. From here, she had an impossible angle into the enemy's control points. She could see the marksman nest, slight movement behind rock, a long barrel. She could see the radio operators by the jammer. She could see an RPG team shifting position with tubes slung like ugly instruments. She could see machine gun crews hugging their weapons like lovers. And she could see the commander. He wasn't obvious. He didn't stand tall. He stayed behind cover, using hand signals, moving only when he needed to. But his stillness was the stillness of someone used to being obeyed. Below, the pass showed her the enemy's intent like a diagram. They weren't just trying to kill. They were building a funnel, sealing exits, positioning a vehicle team, something meant to grab the hard case and any survivors. Capture, propaganda, the module. She settled into the nest in near silence. Packed snow to level her support. Checked wind with her meter. Adjusted her sling. Dotted a correction on her dope card with a pencil stub. Her pulse slowed. She made one choice that would define the next minutes. She did not transmit her position. Comms were compromised. Even short range could be sniffed by a competent jammer team. If she broadcast, she risked letting the enemy triangulate her perch. She risked turning herself into a target before she could do the work. Instead, she became quieter. The wind shifted, stacking with snow dust in a brief alignment. Glare dulled just enough, gust steady enough to mask sound. Visibility on her target's clay. Her fingers settled on the trigger, and the storm she had been holding back, the storm nobody saw coming, prepared to break. She didn't start with the loudest gun. She started with the brain. Target ladder, force multipliers first. That was the difference between a firefight and a solution. JAMA and radio operators. She found the radio operator closest to the antenna, the one whose hand moved in a precise rhythm. Chirp, signal, glance toward the drone's path. He leaned forward to speak. Her shot was a single controlled crack, swallowed by wind. The radio operator collapsed backward into the snow, headset wires snapping loose. The chirp pattern stuttered. Below, in the creek bed, the comm specialist suddenly heard a faint crackle in his long-range headset. Not clear, not clean, but alive. "We've got something," he breathed. "We've got. Hold." The platoon chief didn't celebrate. He didn't have time. But hope is a fuel all its own, and it hit the team like a warm drink. Next, the enemy marksman. She tracked the nest, waited for the slight shift of barrel as he adjusted to a new silhouette. When he exposed just enough, she fired. The crack of the marksman stopped mid-rhythm. His control of the open ground vanished like a snapped string. In the creek bed, a SEAL lifted his head an inch and didn't get punished. He looked shocked, like the laws of physics had changed. Third and fourth, RPG teams. They were repositioning, angling for the pickup zone, thinking ahead to where the bird might appear. If those tubes stayed active, extraction would become a fireball. She dropped the first RPG man as he stepped over a rock seam, tube swinging. The second froze in confusion. Turned, she dropped him too. The tubes fell useless into the snow like broken limbs. She paused, not because she was savoring it, because she needed to read the enemy's reaction. Confusion rippled across the high shelf. Fighters looked the wrong way. Someone shouted into a dead radio. The machine gun burst became less synchronized, more desperate, like a drummer losing tempo. Turning point shut, she needed to break coordination completely. Near the commander, a spotter, mortar lead or jammer team leader, was giving hand signals toward a crew tucked behind rocks. He was the one who'd been bracketing the fallback fold, the one controlling indirect threat. She waited until he leaned out to signal again, then fired. He dropped, arms slack, hand signal dying mid-gesture. The bracketing stopped. Below, the platoon chief saw the gap and immediately exploited it. "Move! Move now! On me! Drag him! Go!" The team began a controlled push out of the worst of the kill zone, dragging the wounded point man on a skid made from slings and a broken pack frame. It wasn't graceful. It was necessary. Her job wasn't done. It had barely started. Machine gun crews next, because machine guns make ground impossible. She tagged one gunner, then the assistant. The weapon went quiet, barrel pointing at nothing. The second machine gun shifted to cover, trying to take up slack. She didn't let it. Then came the moment that would later be named, replayed, dissected. The storm shot. She had been watching the shelf above the enemy position all along. Not just the men, the terrain, the snowpack, the cornice line that hung over the rock like a fragile lip. The way wind had been loading that lip, layering snow onto it until it looked too perfect, too heavy. The gust she'd been waiting for arrived, steady and strong, lifting snow dust into the air. For a heartbeat, the high shelf blurred. She fired into the cornice line where it was weakest. Not a random place. A seam where rock warmed slightly under sun, where snow bonded poorly. The shot hit. The cornice didn't explode. It simply let go. A crack ran across the lip, fast as lightning. Snow sheared. A slab released with a heavy sound of something enormous deciding to fall. It rolled down and became an avalanche beginning. Snow accelerating, dragging more snow, tearing loose rock. It swept across the shelf where clustered enemy fighters had taken position, smashed into their cover, swallowed their shapes. It wasn't poetic. It was brutal physics. In seconds, the enemy shelf became a moving white wall. Men vanished. Weapons vanished. The heavy weapon that had been thumping was erased mid-thump. 4 to 2 enemies were caught in the slide's path. The number would be confirmed later, some buried, some broken against rock, some thrown into ravines. In the moment, it was just quiet. A whole line of fire removed. Below, the SEALs froze for a fraction of a second, staring up, unable to process the sudden absence of death. Then training snapped them back. Go, the platoon chief roared. Now, while they are blind. They moved, crossing exposed ground in short bursts, using the enemy's disarray as cover. The comms specialist caught a broken message through the crackle, extraction acknowledging, warning that the window was nearly gone. We've got a bird on standby, he said, voice tight. But they are spooked. They can't hold long. The enemy didn't stay confused for long. Competent enemies adapt. A new drone buzzed overhead, closer, scanning tighter. Another followed. The enemy launched them in a grid, trying to locate the source of their sudden losses. Climbers began moving toward her perch, faster now, no longer patient. They knew someone was up there. They didn't know where, but they knew the high ground had betrayed them. A heavy weapon repositioned, something with enough punch to rake rock. It began hammering likely hide sites, chewing stone into powder, trying to smoke her out by force. Her optic glass took a spray of grit. Fine ice crystals clung to it. She wiped carefully, but clarity reduced. Every shot became more difficult. She shifted to a secondary position, sliding lower with her cord, moving like a shadow through rock seams. Then she saw something that made her stomach tighten. During the chaos, an assault element wasn't going for bodies. They were going for the hard case. They moved straight toward the seal carrying it, using the remaining machine gun fire as cover. Enemy motive made physical. She found their leader, different posture, different confidence, the one whose gestures made the others move. Squad leader, force multiplier. She fired. He dropped. The assault element hesitated, momentum broken. One man tried to grab the case anyway. She waited, because behind him, in the line of sight, the hut sat like a moral boundary. The man drifted too close to that line. One bad shot, one missing glare, and rounds could track toward civilians. She held fire. Fear rose in her throat. Not fear of dying, fear of choosing wrong. Function over fear. She waited until the man moved clean, exposed away from the hut line. Then she fired. He dropped, hands reaching for nothing. The assault element fractured, retreating back toward cover. Above her, Crampin scraped rock. Too close. She heard breathing, human, labored from climbing. She didn't look up immediately. She didn't panic. She slid her cord, lowered herself into a notch, moving into shadow. She left behind a small decoy, something warm, a heat pack tucked into a scrap of cloth. In drone view, it would glow like a body. In human view, it was nothing. The drone angled toward the decoy. The heavy weapon raked the wrong rock seam. She moved again. Then the commander exposed himself. He did it to regain control. Stood higher, gestured sharply, tried to reform the line. For a moment, his competence overrode caution. She had been waiting for that moment since she first spotted him. One shot, he dropped behind the rock, and the way the enemy moved changed instantly. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle and deadly, like a spine being removed. The remaining fighters began to break. Not in full rout, but in the small withdrawals that signal a force no longer believes in its plan. Below, the SEALs reached the pickup zone, an open patch wide enough for a bird to risk. Rota noise arrived, growing fast, beating the air into violence. Snow blasted sideways, turning daylight into a white curtain. The platoon chief waved arms, guiding the bird in. The comm specialist shouted into the MIC now that it worked, voice cracking with urgency. The corpsman hauled the wounded aboard first. The SEAL carrying the hard case followed, clutching it like the only thing keeping the world from falling apart again. In the chaos, the enemy tried to rally, but without coordination they were just men with guns in snow glare. The bird lifted, rotors screaming, and in the whiteout churn beneath it, the quiet operator moved down from her perch, appearing out of the mountain's blankness like she'd been carved from it. She reached the bird last, climbing aboard without fanfare, gloves scraped, breath controlled, eyes steady. Nobody joked. Nobody called her extra. They just made room. On the ground, rota wash had turned snow into a blinding cyclone. In the air, it became a softer haze, drifting away beneath the bird like the mountain was finally exhaling. Inside the cabin, Bodies were pressed close. The wounded point man lay strapped down, face pale but alive. The corpsman kept pressure, checked pulse, murmured updates like prayer. The comms specialist sat with his headset half off, staring at it like it had betrayed him. "That jammer," he said quietly. It wasn't terrain. It was a real setup. Sophisticated. The platoon chief didn't answer. He was looking at the attach, at her scraped gloves, at the calm way she sat as if she'd just finished a long run. The intel tech clutched the hard case in his lap, knuckles white. He looked like someone who'd aged 5 years in an hour. When they reached the outpost, the world felt unreal. The same snowfield that had looked innocent that morning now looked like it was hiding knives. In the debrief room, maps covered the table. Photos were pinned to a board, ridge lines, shelf angles, the scar where the slide had torn down the mountain. The number came out slowly, like nobody wanted to say it. 4-2, the officer said, reading from a report. Confirmed in the slide path. Additional takedowns at jammer, marksman, RPG teams, machine gun crews. Total enemy losses, significant. No one cheered. This wasn't a scoreboard. It was a fact with weight. The intel tech finally admitted what he'd hidden. The module wasn't just data. It was access, routing keys, and identifiers that could let the enemy spoof the surveillance network, blind it, and use it to slip forces across the border undetected. And if they captured a SEAL team alive while taking it, that would be a propaganda victory with a long tail. I minimized it, the text said, voice thin. I thought if you knew how valuable it was, you'd refuse the mission. Or someone higher would shut it down. I didn't want delays. The platoon chief's eyes narrowed. Delays are how you don't walk into a funnel. The tech flinched, guilt and fear twisting together. I know. They reviewed the jammer fragments recovered from the ridge. The comm specialist pointed at the components like they were evidence in a trial. They planned to isolate you from air support. They used drones to sync their fire plan. That chirp pattern, someone was coordinating like a conductor. The officer looked at the attach. How did you? She didn't interrupt him. She waited until he finished. Then she spoke in the same calm tone she'd used in the kill zone. I listened, she said. The pattern was there. Why didn't you transmit? The officer asked. Even after you got position. We could have coordinated better. The attached gaze flicked to the window, to the mountains beyond. Her face stayed composed, but something old moved behind her eyes. Because they were sniffing transmissions, she said. And because I learned, once, that talking can get people found. The room quieted. Nobody asked for details. They didn't need a full story to understand the shape of it. A past operation, a mistake, a consequence that lived in silence. The platoon chief cleared his throat. It sounded like discomfort. Or respect. He didn't make a big speech. He didn't hand her a medal in the room. He did something smaller, and therefore heavier. He corrected the way he spoke about her. When we write this up, he said, looking at the officer, we're not calling her an attach. We're calling her what she is. He glanced at her. Our marksman. Our overwatch. Our reason we're sitting here breathing. The attach gave the smallest nod, like she accepted the words but didn't need them. The moral question about the hut came next. Patrols had checked it after extraction. 2 occupants, the officer reported. Shepherd and child. Both alive. No rounds near the structure. The attach exhaled once, slow. The decision to hold fire had been the right one. Costs were tallied too. Frost-numbed fingers. Bruised ribs from rock. A torn glove. A quiet shake in the hands once the adrenaline finally left. She didn't dramatize it. She didn't deny it. Fear hadn't vanished. It had been managed. Function over fear. As the debrief ended, the platoon chief stopped her at the door. No audience. No ceremony. He said, back at staging, the jokes. That's on us. She didn't answer immediately. The chief swallowed, then added, you're not a ghost. You're family. The attach looked at him, eyes steady in a way that made people honest. Respect doesn't need noise, she said. He nodded, like he'd been taught something he should have known already. Later, she stepped outside alone. Daylight snow, calmer now. Wind soft. The mountains looked peaceful again, like they hadn't tried to eat men alive an hour earlier. She stood for a moment and let the cold bite her cheeks. Somewhere out there, the scar of the slide cut across the ridge. 42 enemies, gone in seconds, because she'd noticed what others ignored and acted in the one window the mountain offered. She flexed her fingers, feeling the numbness, the ache. Behind her, the outpost hummed, radios working again, men moving, life continuing. She looked out at the white world and understood something simple and sharp. The storm wasn't the avalanche. The storm was the decision. And sometimes, in a place where the noise wants to swallow you, the most powerful thing you can be is quiet, until the exact second you can't be anymore.